first up on our agenda, we have item number 2, green shipping lanes, emissions reduction and cyber security. So we're very fortunate we have with us Lieutenant Commander Nelson, who is going to give us a presentation on the overview of maritime security threats. So Nelson is the British Royal Navy's Maritime Domain Assessment International Liaison Officer, and he's based in Singapore, the Singapore Information Fusion Centre. He is a Harvard Business School alumni and 22 years of maritime operational and private sector experience. He's recently served in innovation and experimentation in the UK Strategic Command HQ, previously as a Principal Welfare Officer and Patrol Boat Commanding Officer. So very, very pleased to have Nelson here to really give us an overview of maritime cyber threats. And the reason that we have Nelson with us and talking on this item, this is connected to an action out of IRCC20, where we were invited as a commission to organise workshops on environmental emissions and on cyber security to member states. So we felt this was in part completing that action, and as I say, we'll likely make this available to other regional hydrographic commissions. So Nelson, I'm happy to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, sir, and good day, everybody. Good day, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To get started, I'd be most grateful for your help, please, in answering 2 questions to give us all an understanding of, I guess, the general levels of existing cyber knowledge and engagement. In a moment, the first question will appear in the chat box now, so please be aware that your answers are all anonymous and will be aggregated and shared very shortly. And so the first question is, how often is cybersecurity discussed in your meetings? Please choose one of the 3 options: constantly, regularly, or it's not discussed. Now, I'll just give everyone a moment to find the chat box and the poll question. After you have selected your answer, please remember to click submit. Really interesting to see the results coming in. I can see 20 responses, 21 responses. Thank you very much for that engagement. If you can't find the chat box, anybody, then just look up in the top menu bar and you'll see on the far left side there's a chat function. If you open that, you'll see the first question there. Brilliant. 31 responses. That's pretty strong out of the 44 participants. So what we'll do is, and whilst those results continue to come in, we're almost there, we'll move on to the second question, exactly in the same place, please. And that question is, does your organisation have a cybersecurity board plan or strategy in place? And quite simply, this is either yes, no, or don't know. So if we could have a look at those, please. With those results coming now. Just give them a chance to come through. Almost everybody there. Really interesting. And we'll say 35%. Sorry, 35 responses. They're great. Thank you very much, everyone. You can see those responses, and we'll. Here they are, they're in now, and I think the important thing is to highlight that for question 1, only 56% of respondents said regularly or constantly in terms of cybersecurity being something that they discussed at their senior level meetings. Unfortunately, it looks like about 42% said it wasn't something that they discussed. And to the second questions, the results indicate that 21%, sorry, looks like 68%, forgive me, have a plan or a strategy in place, with 23% no strategy or plan in place. Well, that's really interesting, because just to put it into perspective, in 2022, Harvard Business Review published the results from a survey of all Fortune 500 companies, where they asked the same questions. Now, interestingly, for question 1, it was found that only 68% of respondents said that they discussed cybersecurity regularly or constantly in the private sector, while 9% unfortunately said it was not something discussed at board level. Furthermore, for question 2, interesting to compare the results here, 23% of directors answered that they had no board plan or strategy in place, which is exactly the same as what we've got in our little catchment in here. So, uncannily kind of similar in that sense. But I think the important thing is to show you this additional insight from the survey, and that's that it went further in trying to understand senior level leaders' cybersecurity role. And while 50% of those respondents said that there had been a discussion about their cybersecurity role, there was actually no consensus about what it should be, and therefore inaction followed, which is why the 23% no executive plan or strategy figure is actually surprisingly high. What I'll aim to do by the end of this short session, over the next the remaining 20 minutes, is to give you some key considerations at senior management level and actionable steps that can be taken. And give me one moment, we'll just share my screen. And just checking, Adam and Stuart, sirs, can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see that, Nelson. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir. So my name is Nelson, and I am a British Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy's Maritime Domain Awareness International Liaison Officer based at the Information Fusion Centre in Singapore. Now, by background, I'm not a hydrographer, and I'm also not a cyber specialist. But at the Information Fusion Centre, we collect open source data on a number of different maritime security fields, one of which is cyber. Consequently, we have relatable information to share which we think is relevant to the hydrographic community at this time, given the current digitisation trend and the next generation of digital delivery of navigational data that is on our doorstep. Furthermore, as hydrographic organisations engage with the transition to data-rich navigation solutions that support marine autonomous shipping, including the acceleration of adopting fully digital products at sea in lieu of paper, the potential safety benefit to mariners is absolutely clear. Yet, I now offer for your consideration that paradoxically, the cybersecurity risks have undeniably increased. Now, this is in no way meant to scaremonger or to set panic at all, absolutely not, but it is an honest appraisal of the global cybersecurity threat trend that we're seeing. So noting that we're now 3 years into the decade that the IHO have labelled as their S100 data standard implementation decade, we are quickly approaching the headmark of 2026. That is for S100 based products and services to be carriage compliant. So as we contemplate the challenging timeline to achieve that, I highlight now that this is a good point to understand that cyber risks do exist in the maritime domain. But what risks exactly? I'll aim to give an overview of that as part of today's scope. I'll also try and bring the data to life by sharing a couple of pertinent maritime industry related case studies, noting of course that this briefing is limited by classification to official. I'll finish with what I hope will be some useful follow-on points and questions for your consideration. The remainder of this presentation will be 15 minutes, leaving time for Q&A discussion at the end. Please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat box and we'll aim to address them. Alternatively, you're welcome to virtually raise your digital hand and we shall endeavour to bring you into discussion live. So, what cyber threats exist in the maritime? Our assessment at the IFC concludes that the outlook for maritime security this decade is that it will remain key for supply chain security. Meanwhile, maritime cybersecurity faces threats at multiple places, including ports, communication systems, institutions, companies, and organisations linked to the maritime, and of course, ships themselves. On that last point, ships are becoming ever more reliant on digital tools to function, many of which are automated. At the same time, a 2022 McKinsey study found that more than most industries, maritime infrastructure tends to be old and complicated, further hampering marine cybersecurity by making the threats difficult to pinpoint and the vulnerabilities hard to prioritise. Another risk factor the study reported was the absence of IT literate people on board ships and a lack of reliable connectivity with shore-based HQs, where the all-round cybersecurity knowledge base is also extraordinarily lacking. In talking about risks, it is important to highlight another key finding in the analysis, which is that in the best case scenario, where an organisation has a maritime cybersecurity strategy or action plan, that same plan has, in 60% of cases, not actually been stress tested or exercised with staff across Fortune 500 companies, who are therefore left none the wiser on what the contingency plans or the recovery processes are in the event of a cyber incident occurring. So look at case studies and a threat to maritime information systems we assess is a threat to global trade. But what does that threat actually look like in practice? Well, I highlight these three case studies that represent the most likely industry-wide threats that currently exist. The consequences of suffering from a ransomware attack for the JNPT, which is one of the oldest and largest port terminals in India, included the shutting down of the harbour for 5 days, with all automated operations out of service and ships being diverted. It is thought this occurred by drive-by downloading. That is when a user unknowingly visits an infected website and then ransomware is downloaded and installed without their knowledge. But ships themselves, increasingly computerized, are vulnerable too. Malware, including the 2017 NotPetya incident, is often designed to spread from computer to computer on a network. That means that connected devices on board ships are also vulnerable. For example, at the IFC, we know of a cargo container vessel where the switchboard was shut down after ransomware found its way on board. That ship was rendered inoperable for 3 days. Crucial navigation systems such as ECDIS have also been hit. One such incident was reported to us in 2022 by the maritime technical lead at cybersecurity firm NCC Group. This also concerned a ship at an Asian port, but this time it was a large tanker weighing 80,000 tons. One of the crew had brought a USB stick on board with some paperwork that needed to be printed. Now, that was how the malware got into the ship's computers in the first instance, but it was when a second crew member went to update the ship's charts before sailing, also via USB, that the navigational systems were infected. Departure was consequently delayed, the ship's cargo had to be transferred, and dollars were lost and an investigation launched. What NCC Group highlighted is that ECDIS systems actually rarely have antivirus software, a clear vulnerability. The concern is that it is now also possible, and this has been proven by in 2022 by a US Department of Defense trial in partnership with MIT, and for a hacker attempting to maneuver or even sabotage the ship itself through targeted manipulation of its systems. Now, the hackathon experiment proved that hackers could conduct a targeted attack that changed the destination of a ship while also ordering the coordinates broadcast by the system on AIS, potentially allowing someone to spoof the position of the ship. What these case studies, I think, highlights is that the maritime industry has work to do on cybersecurity education, exercising, and the implementation and stress testing of its plans. So, boiling down these case studies then, what does this mean for hydrographers and what they really need to know about maritime cybersecurity? Well, at the director level, I believe that there are probably 5 key things that senior hydrographic leaders need to know. First is that cybersecurity is about more than protecting data. Back in the 2000s, protecting organizations from cyber incidents was primarily seen as protecting data. Leaders worried about personal information being leaked, customer lists being stolen, and credit cards being used fraudulently. These are still issues, but cybersecurity is about more than just protecting data. As we digitize our processes and our operations, connect our data sets to control systems that enable remote management of software and equipment, cybersecurity has taken on a much larger position in our threat landscape. Poor oversight can now mean a danger to lives at sea and significant reputational damage because data was not protected appropriately. Hydrographic readers need a real picture of the cyber-physical and cyber-digital threats their organisations face. And secondly, the executive leadership must be knowledgeable participants in cybersecurity oversight. Organisations who are well prepared for cyber incident have shared their plans with leaders and practiced the actions to be taken to build muscle memory for use in a breach situation. Thirdly, boards, I think, and senior management must focus on risk, reputation, and business continuity. And so when cyber professionals develop policies and practices, which are the fundamental triad of goals, which effectively ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of both systems and data, that's necessary. But the discussion would be very different than one about the goals of risk, reputation, and business continuity, which are the key concerns of leadership. While hydrographic executives strategize, I think, about ways to manage business risk, cybersecurity professionals concentrate their efforts at the technical, organizational, and operational levels. The languages used to manage the business and manage cybersecurity are different, and this might obscure both the understanding of the real risk and the best approach to address the risk. Perhaps because cybersecurity is a rather complex technical field, the board might not be fully aware of cyber risks, and senior managers therefore are not necessarily aware of the protective measures that need to be taken. But there are actionable approaches to address this, like focusing on common goals and asking the right question. Fourth is the prevailing approach to cybersecurity, and that is a defence in depth approach, which is really a series of layered protective measures that can safeguard valuable information and sensitive data because of a failure in one of the defence mechanisms and can, of course, be backed up by another. But technology alone cannot keep it safe enough. Establishing security operations centres that provide oversight and human involvement to notice things that technology miss, as was the case in the SolarWinds breach, where an astute associate noticed something unusual and investigated, is important. And fifth, cybersecurity is an organisational problem, not just a technical problem. Now, many cybersecurity problems occur because of human error, as we saw with our case studies. But of course, a study into this from Cambridge University revealed that 88% of data breach incidents were caused by employee mistakes. Aligning all employees, not just the cybersecurity team, around practices and processes to keep their organisation safe is not a technical problem. It's an organisational problem. Cybersecurity requires awareness and action from all members of the organisation to recognise anomalies, alert leaders, and ultimately to mitigate risks. Now, research on the back of that from MIT and Stanford University suggests that this is best done by creating a tech culture defined as an environment infused with the attitudes, beliefs, and values which motivate cybersecurity behaviours. Now, this does not mean that everyone becomes a cybersecurity expert. It means that everyone, I think, is held accountable for overseeing and behaving as if he or she was a security champion. This adds, I think, a human layer of protection to avoid, detect, and report any behaviour that can be exploited by a malicious actor. Leaders absolutely set the culture, but they also reinforce and personify the values and beliefs for action. Interestingly, and rather concerningly, no matter the hydrographic cyber plan that may be in place, what we are seeing with our data analysis at the ISC is that for every new technology that cybersecurity professionals invent and every policy or plan that may be put in place, it's only a matter of time until malicious actors find a way around it. I think what we therefore need is evolving leadership approaches as we move into the next phase of digitising hydrography and securing it. For hydrographic executive level leaders, this requires developing new ways to carry out their fiduciary responsibility to stakeholders and oversight responsibility for managing business risk. Leaders cannot abdicate oversight of cybersecurity or simply delegate it to operating managers. They must be knowledgeable leaders who prioritise cybersecurity and personally demonstrate their asking the right questions at your next meeting, particularly board meetings, might just prevent a breach. Furthermore, at the executive level, this is where we need to really look to ensure that we face up and outwards to tackle potential cybersecurity issues in the hydrographic industry. That means a collaborative approach among hydrographic organisations being meaningfully facilitated between local, national and regional levels to secure our collective system of systems by design and evolving our approach to cyber resilience. So in conclusion then, and at this point I refer you to the answers in the checkbox that you all gave right at the very beginning, where we opened with 2 survey questions. I think it's important to highlight that the number of respondents which said that cybersecurity was regularly or constantly talked of, and indeed that wasn't. But I think the point is, alarmingly, looking back at the Fortune 500 data, 68% across all 500 companies discuss cybersecurity at senior level regularly or constantly, and 9% do not discuss cybersecurity at board level in Fortune 500 companies. Now look at that and the numbers of incidents that happened in the private sector compared to our small catchment area and data set. And I think the other thing to highlight is this final point, which I'd like to end on, and this idea that despite having a plan in place, I want to re-emphasise that 60% of organisations globally have yet to publish a cybersecurity plan. Who have published a cybersecurity plan have yet to stress test it. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And that concludes my presentation. I'll just now open up for any questions.
Thank you, Nelson. Excellent presentation, and certainly I learned a lot from that. We within our organisation are regularly reminded by our IT technical experts regarding risks around cybersecurity. But I think you've praised it well and summarised it well in terms of it's a mindset and the human error involved. So therefore, it's an organisational problem. I have a question to you. I'm a senior hydrographer, and what kind of cybersecurity questions should I be asking?
Well, thank you, sir, for kicking off discussion on this important question. And I think the key to it is that whatever approach we take is that we've got to ensure at the executive level that for any cybersecurity question that is asked, is that what we aim to do is that ensure that it deepens our collective understanding, I think, of how cybersecurity is being managed by our respective organisations. Now, on that note, I'm going to share these slides with everybody, and I think as something to help everybody, I've created a handy crib, which I'll just share my screen again, if that's okay, sir. Here it is. And so I'm just checking, Adam, you can see that?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
yes, we can.
Great. So here's a crib then, just as food for thought, really, of I think the kind of questions that I think will help you really connect with a kind of tech-savvy cybersecurity culture that I think needs to be top-down led. And quite simply, asking these questions will, I think, also raise awareness of the importance of cybersecurity and the need to prioritise action. Now, whilst other people think of potential questions or discussion points, just to finish the session, let me elaborate on some of these questions that give you a little bit more depth. That first question, we know we cannot be 100% secure. Difficult decisions need to be made. But what I think we've seen in our analysis at IFC and across industry and the research is that if there is no agreement on what to protect, the rest of anybody's cybersecurity strategy is actually moot. And to the second point on what are the layers? Well, executive hydrographic leaders, I think, don't need to make the decision on how to implement on each of these layers. But I think what they do need to know is what layers of protection are in place and how well each layer is protecting the organization. And to the third question, well, I think since many breaches are not detected immediately after they occur, an executive hydrographic board must make sure it knows how a breach is detected and agree with the risk level on that board resulting from this approach. And on point 4, what are responses? Our response plans in the event of an incident? Well, it's highly unlikely the plan will be executed exactly as designed. But nevertheless, I think they are critical to responding appropriately, which leads me on to the 5th point. And I want to highlight here that using drills and tabletop exercises to build muscle memory sounds like a bit of a luxury. But should your hydrographic office or customer base have an incident with the software that you distribute, you want to be sure that that response muscle is ready to work. 6th, then, and what are our business recovery plans? I think the important thing here is to talk about data for a moment, and just to allude to it briefly and to say that data recovery might be different if all the records in your data sets are destroyed or corrupted by a malicious actor who encrypts files or manipulates them, which is what we've seen happen in a number of attacks in the private sector. And finally, on the subject of investment and whether or not we're investing enough in cybersecurity financially, I think this harks back to the point of using simulations of cyber attacks and penetration or vulnerability tests to test your level of protection and risk tolerance. And this will give you enough data, I think, to begin to help you with aiding in further financial investment decision making. So this will be at the very back of the briefing in a PDF that we share with everybody dialing into the call today. I hope that answered your question, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Nelson. We'll certainly make sure we are distributing your presentation, and it will be available online, as will be the recording. Got a couple of questions there in the chat, so it seems like a cybersecurity capability in ECDIS is a key failure. Is this something IHO is looking at, the next generation of ECDIS, as we move to a more comprehensive S101? So that's an interesting question. So S100 rather does have a security encryption component to it, but I don't know about ECDIS. Perhaps our IHO director might be able to comment on that, because ECDIS is system is through IMO, delivered through IMO, performance standards, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A good question there from Rod. Exactly. We've got the S100 security system, which is data encryption, but it has been recognized at IMO and also within IHO that there's definitely cybersecurity risks which will affect ECDIS. The ENC working group has been tasked to work on a cybersecurity guideline. They have finalized that, and the completed the approved version will be submitted to the upcoming HSSC 15, and then it will be published and available on the IHO website. I'll put in a link in the chat box, so you can have a look at the current draft. It's a fairly final draft. It does include a checklist as well, just to follow up on the very good presentation from Nelson. Yes, the IHO are definitely looking at that side, but you're also right. There's more the data the security of the actors is very much more on the hardware side, hardware and software and the operating system. Good, thank you.
Thank you very much, Abri. So final question then from Chris Hunt, UKHO. Nelson, can you what do you mean by stress testing? What does that mean?
Sure, no problem, sir. And thank you, Chris, for that observation. Those two observations, the one about stress testing and the other observation on it looking like they're accidents more than threats. Okay, so stress testing is a term that we tend to use militarily, but also in the cybersecurity sector, where you'll take a plan or a system and actually put it through its paces to the full extent of every extremity, and that's to prove in the effectiveness of the encryption, but also to prove the robustness of one's reactions, and that means actually sometimes face-to-face in tabletop tactics sessions where we sit down, run through organisation, run through ships with their reactions and the measures that they take, but also at the same time having cybersecurity experts back at home base next to IT professionals, again running them through the same situation and actually collating data that gets everyone together at the end of the event and allows people to then observe how much that sort of system was actually able to withstand a cyber attack, rather than actually having to take down the system in any way. So hopefully that makes sense there, Chris. But at the same time, on the question around accidents are more of a threat than specific targets, just very quickly, and that's to say that what I didn't elaborate on was that if you go one level back from each of those case studies that we showed, actually in two of those incidents, they were deliberately targeted. And just on one further case, we've had an incident very recently where an email which was targeting a ship that was conducting a ship-to-ship oil transfer at sea was actually all designed by AI, which completely threw the master and allowed a ship to come in and take its oil completely unknowingly to the master, then transfer that oil elsewhere for nefarious purposes. So it was deliberately targeted. And be under no illusion that just two steps back from these apparent accidents, you have sometimes quite malicious actors all the way up to state level that can be quite actually localized as well. So hopefully that helps answer your questions, Chris. Happy to talk about any of that in more detail later, but conscious we're out of time now, sir. So handing back to you, Adam.
So thank you very much, Nelson. Very much appreciate you giving this presentation at reasonably short notice. I think it's been hugely valuable for us, and we'll certainly use this within the wider hydrographic community. So we appreciate your attention and your presentation. Thank you very much.